Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The question and topic that we're going to discuss today vis-a-vis Islamic customs and etiquette is that is a 3-day mourning period of a dead prescribed by the sources of Islam, and whether any mourning can be extended beyond these 3 days. Would that be something which is absolutely against the dictates of the Sharia? This is the question that we're going to address today. Now, it needs to be understood that this 3-day mourning period has been prescribed, of course, in a narrative. It is ascribed to the Prophet. And the Prophet is reported to have said to a lady that she must not extend the mourning period beyond 3 days, except if the deceased person is her husband. Now, on the basis of this narrative, it is construed that any person who exceeds this 3-day limit and if he expresses his grief beyond these 3 days, then this would be absolutely against what the Prophet has said, and he would be a sinner in this regard. Now, first of all, it needs to be understood that all narratives of the Prophet have to be understood and analyzed on the basis of the content and on the basis of the fact that what they convey to vis-a-vis the words of the Prophet. And we have to see whether they are legal injunctions, because we know that the Prophet himself was the Sharia giver on behalf of God, and also we know that the Prophet lived in a certain society in which he had to advise certain people regarding certain things. Now, in the times of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Arabian society was ridden with ladies or with women who would wail and cry a lot on the death of a deceased, and it would at times take days and months. And this wailing would extend for a considerable period of time. Now, in this particular context, in this particular background, the Prophet has actually asked these ladies to confine their wailings to 3 days. And of course, on the basis of this narrative and hadith, it is now understood as a general principle that Islam prescribes a 3-day mourning period, after which a person must not grieve in any way for the dead person. Now, as I said, that the second important thing in this regard is that one must analyze that this particular narrative is not a legal injunction at all. It does not prescribe an absolute or explicit 3-day mourning period, and it does not say that if the wailing enters into a 4th day, then a person would be sinning. All it says is that this mourning period should be kept to as minimum as possible, and after 3 days in general circumstances, it should be adhered to. However, as I said, that this is not a legal injunction. It's primarily a social advice given in a certain social scenario of Arabia. And of course, Muslims would do well if they stick to this advice, because you see, when a person dies, this is the will of God, and one has to accept the will of God, and the sooner the better. However, since human emotions are attached to that dead person, so if a person grieves for some time, it is absolutely in accordance with that human nature. However, this grief must not extend beyond 3 days in general circumstances. So this is what the ruling would be in general circumstances. But as I said, since this narrative itself has a social perspective, it is primarily a social advice given to people. So therefore, if a person is still feeling the grief on the 4th day or the 5th day or the 6th day, and also at times he is forced to express that grief because of his internal emotions, then this would not be something of a violation of this narrative. Because, as I said, this narrative itself is based on a certain social advice, and the principle that can be derived from this advice or this whole narrative is that this mourning period should be as minimum as possible, because the bottom line is that a person must accept the directive of God, the will of God in this regard. And if he has decided to call some of our near ones to himself, then it is only befitting that we accept this decision of God. And of course, since our emotions are attached to that person, it is not being said that we do not express these emotions. What is being said is that this expression should be as minimum as possible. And of course, it should be in line with the fact that it should be as within the limits as it is possible. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.